The auditorium lights dimmed to a soft glow as students murmured their way into the cavernous lecture hall, the late afternoon sun slanting through tall windows and dusting the polished oak floor with golden streaks. Doctor! Naomi Walker stood at the front podium, her posture poised and confident, in a charcoal grey pantsuit that spoke a quiet authority. She surveyed the room from behind her lectern, letting the hush settle over the rows of folding chairs like a benediction. Around her, the banners of Midvale University, Excellence in Inquiry, and Diversity Fuels Discovery, hung on brick walls as mute witnesses to the gravity of what was to come. With a single tap on her tablet, the projection screen behind her flared to life, displaying the title of her lecture in elegant serif type. Echoes of Freedom, Reconstructing Justice in Modern America. A ripple of anticipation pulsed through the audience. Some students leaned forward, pencils poised. Others cracked open notepads, determined to capture every word. Dr. Walker's life's work had been to trace the arc of civil rights from 1865 to the present. And today, she would challenge her listeners to see the unfinished business of equality in their own lives. She began in a measured voice that carried to the very back row. Good afternoon. Today, we explore how the promises of Reconstruction inform our understanding of justice and community in the 21st century. As she spoke, her fingers danced across the screen to reveal images of Freedmen's Bureau schools, sharecropping, ledgers, and the red line maps of segregated neighborhoods. With each slide, the quiet grew deeper, as if her audience sensed the weight of history unfolding before them. 20 minutes in, as Dr. Walker transitioned to a case study on the 1964 Civil Rights Act's unfinished work. A sharp interruption cut through her cadence. "This is bullshit," came a voice from the center aisle, dripping contempt. Heads turned, notebooks slipped, and Dr. Walker didn't falter, her calm demeanor an anchor in the sudden storm. "Excuse me," she asked, her tone precise but unsparing. The student, a tall young man, in a red baseball cap, stood with arms akimbo. "You're pushing some radical narrative," he sneered. "You think we owe everything just because of color?" Before she could respond, he leaned forward, voice rising, and spat the words that transformed curiosity into horror. "No, get out of here with your lies." The auditorium gasped. Dr. Walker's students recoiled. A tense silence stretched between the slur and the stunned aftermath. For a heartbeat, Dr. Walker simply looked at him, her chest rising and falling in slow control, eyes not widening but narrowing with measured sadness. The projector's light flickered over her profile, illuminating the still in her jaw. Then, without a tremor in her voice, she said, "That word carries centuries of pain and violence. I'd like you to repeat it, louder." The student froze, confusion rippling across his face. Murmurs broke out, some furious, some anxious to see what would come next. Dr. Walker waited, a calm expectation sharper than any rebuke. At that moment, the entire university held its breath, wondering whether reason or outrage would fill the cavernous hall. And in that pregnant pause, she poised herself to deliver a lesson far deeper than any lecture slide could convey. The auditorium held its breath as Dr. Walker's measured words hung in the air like a challenge. The student in the red cap swallowed, his mouth opening and closing without sound, as dozens of peers stared, some horrified, some transfixed. Dr. Walker remained perfectly still behind the lectern, arms uncrossed now, her shoulders squared in quiet command. The soft glow of the projector flickered across her face, illuminating the calm resolve in her eyes. Finally, the student's voice emerged, trembling at first, then cracking into a guttural whisper of the same hateful slur. The sound ricocheted off the high ceiling, and for an instant, the only thing louder than that word was the collective gasp that swept through the crowd. Dr. Walker waited, her gaze unwavering, until the syllable fell away into uncomfortable silence. Then, still without raising her voice, she said, "Thank you for your demonstration." She tapped a button on her tablet and the projector shifted to a new slide. A stark black and white photograph of African American soldiers rebuilding railroad tracks after the Civil War. Beneath it ran a single line of text. They chose to rebuild a nation despite those who refused their humanity. Murmurs rippled through the hall as faces turned toward the image, then back to Dr. Walker. She stepped away from the lectern and walked slowly down the aisle toward the student, her heels clicking softly on the wood. The red cap did not move. When she reached the row where he stood, she paused, barely breathing. "You've used your voice to elevate racism," she said, voice calm but unmistakable. "Now, I want to know if you can use it to reclaim humanity." She raised her hand, palm out, not as a stop sign, but as an invitation. The student's eyes flicked from her hand to her face, confusion and shame mingling in his expression. She waited long enough that the silence felt uncomfortable. His phone lay forgotten in his lap, earbuds dangling. But the lecture hall had melted away until it was just the two of them. Behind her, the audience shifted, some leaning forward in chairs, others clasping their hands in their laps. Finally, the student's shoulders slumped and his head bowed. Dr. Walker extended a second slide, a blank text box titled "Your Words Matter." She handed him the microphone she carried, motioning for him to speak. His voice cracked as he whispered an apology. Not rehearsed, not perfunctory, but raw. "I'm sorry. I was wrong." The words floated across the space between them, fragile and out of practice. Dr. Walker nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. She gestured for him to return to his seat, then turned back to the podium. The projector shifted again, this time showing a timeline of civil rights milestones and the ongoing disparities that persisted. Voter suppression laws, mass incarceration statistics, educational achievement gaps. She spoke over the data, her voice steady, weaving a narrative that connected one man's moment of hate to centuries of oppression, and to the individual power each listener held to interrupt that cycle. By the time she concluded, her final words urging every student to consider the weight of their speech, the necessity of accountability, and the transformative power of empathy, the lecture hall was silent in a different way. Not stunned by outrage, but moved by a collective reckoning. When the lights brightened, the banners on the brick walls seemed to pulse with renewed relevance. Students filed out slowly, some pausing to offer Dr. Walker a nod of respect, others falling into quiet conversations that crackled with thoughtful energy. In the back row, the student in the red cap lingered a moment, head bowed, then stood and left, leaving behind a hall full of young people who had witnessed not just a disruption, but a radical lesson in courage, consequence, and the possibility of change. The next morning, word of Dr. Walker's confrontation had rippled through the campus faster than any press release could travel. By the time she arrived at her office, a steady stream of emails waited in her inbox, some congratulatory, others indignant, and a few laced with outright threats. In the hallway outside her lecture hall, small clusters of students huddled in animated discussion. Some defended free speech absolutism, others celebrated the pivotal lessons she had delivered about the power of words. As she collected her notes, a timid knock sounded at her door. It was Marcus Fletcher, the student who had hurled the slur. His posture was tentative, shoulders hunched beneath his plain grey hoodie, eyes cast downward. When she invited him in, his voice caught as he asked if he could help address the fallout, suggesting an impromptu forum where students could speak honestly about race, bias, and the burden of history. Dr. Walker peered over her glasses, surprised by his initiative, but quick to seize the moment. She agreed, and together they drafted a proposal for an open-air dialogue on the quad that very afternoon. By 2:00, the grassy expanse in front of the administration building had filled with folding chairs and hastily scribbled placards. "Let's talk, not shout. Words matter. Rewrite our future." A small stage had been erected and a microphone stood ready. Dr. Walker opened the session by recounting the previous day's events, her own deliberate challenge to the hateful slur and the student's reluctant apology, then handed the mic to Marcus. He began haltingly, voice still trembling with residual shame. and spoke of the bitterness he felt growing up in a neighborhood where racial jokes were passed off as harmless banter. He admitted that he had never fully considered the weight of that slur until he heard it reverberate in the hall and saw the pain in Dr. Walker's eyes. His confession drew a hush, and the afternoon sun seemed to pause in his arc as dozens of faces turned toward him. One by one, students rose to share their stories. A freshman woman recounted the moment she first heard classmates mimic her accent. A member of the lacrosse team spoke of fear when police sirens approached late-night practices. A student athlete with tears in his eyes described rushing home to silence his siblings' questions about why he looked guilty simply for running by. Even a few faculty members joined the circle, offering testimonies of microaggressions endured in meetings and conferences. Dr. Walker listened, a clipboard forgotten at her side, as the university's ideals of excellence and diversity found flesh and blood in these voices. As the session drew toward its scheduled end, the student government president, herself an international student of color, stepped forward with a resolution to establish a permanent words and actions council to review campus policies on hate speech, deliver regular training sessions, and foster mentorship programs that would pair upperclassmen with underrepresented freshmen. Applause erupted, spontaneous and sustained, echoing off the brick facades. Dr. Walker rose to close the forum, her voice quiet but resonant. Today we have done more than talk. We have listened, acknowledged, and begun to heal. This is how we rebuild, not through silence, but through shared courage. By evening, campus life had already shifted. Digital bulletin boards carried photos of the quad, students huddled in earnest conversation, signs glowing in the last light. The provocation of a single hateful word had ignited a broader reckoning, one that would ripple into classrooms, dorms, and eventually beyond the walls of Midvale University. And as Dr. Walker walked home beneath the fading sky, she felt an unfamiliar but welcome hope that the ugly history of prejudice could, through sustained dialogue and collective accountability, give way to a community determined to speak and listen its way toward justice. By sunrise the next day, the impact of the Quad Forum still pulsed through Midvale's administration offices. Dr. Walker was summoned to an impromptu meeting in the Provost's suite, a hushed enclave of paneled wood and leather chairs. Outside, the campus lawns were empty, but inside the air crackled with urgency. The dean, the provost, the student affairs director, and student government leaders gathered around an oval table piled high with the morning's newspapers. Headlines like "Campus Confronts Its Racism" and "Professor Turns Slur into Teaching Moment." The dean pushed aside a cup of untouched coffee and leaned forward. "Naomi," she began, voice tight. "What happened yesterday has ignited a firestorm. Incredible student engagement, but also national scrutiny. We need a coordinated institutional response." Dr. Walker drew in a steadying breath, recalling each face on the quad as they'd shared their stories. "We must build on that momentum," she said, her tone measured but passionate. First, mandatory bias response training for all incoming students. Interactive workshops, not just modules. Second, a review of our conduct policy to include clear consequences for hate speech. Third, a permanent advisory council co-chaired by students and faculty to oversee these changes. The provost nodded, flicking through her tablet. "We'll need to secure funding and adjust the spring schedule, but I agree this can't wait for next academic year." Across the table, the student affairs director tapped her pen. "I'll draft a proposal for the Board of Trustees. We'll need your endorsement, Naomi, and Marcus's as well." His leadership at the forum was pivotal. The conversation shifted to logistics, budgets, facilitator vetting, communications. But whenever the talk veered into jargon, Dr. Walker steered it back to the human stakes. The freshmen who'd wept over repeated microaggressions, the international students who feared campus was unsafe, and the black and brown faculty who'd long carried silent burdens. She insisted that training be experiential, role plays, candid panels, rather than checkbox online videos. Several administrators exchanged uneasy glances, aware that nothing about this would be easy. By late morning, they emerged with a concrete plan, a campus-wide courage and conversation. Week in 2 months, mandatory for all undergraduates, an amendment to the student code clearly defining hate speech and microaggressions with tiered disciplinary measures, and a $50,000 grant from the University Foundation to underwrite a living memorial garden where students could gather and reflect. A press release was drafted praising Midvale's commitment to justice and quoting Dr. Walker's words, "Silence no longer serves us. We must confront our biases to fulfill our mission of excellence through diversity." That afternoon, in a packed convocation hall, Dr. Walker and Marcus took the stage once more, this time alongside the Dean and Provost, to unveil the new policies. The audience, a mosaic of hopeful freshmen and skeptical seniors, hushed as the Provost read the official declaration. When Dr. Walker spoke again, her voice rang clear. "We are not perfect, but by naming our failures, we step toward our ideals. These policies are only the beginning. True change lives in your courage, your compassion, your willingness to hold yourselves and each other accountable." As a final gesture, Marcus presented each new student with a seedling to plant in the memorial garden, symbolizing growth from adversity. When the dais fell silent, the entire hall rose in unison, not in mandated applause, but in earnest commitment to a shared future. For a moment, Midvale University stood speechless, united by the knowledge that institutional words, once tested by harsh truth and human courage, could indeed blossom into genuine, lasting change. By the time Courage and Conversation Week rolled around, Midvale's campus had transformed into a living laboratory of dialogue and reflection. The quad's freshly planted memorial garden bloomed with daffodils and tulips, each seedling a testament to promises made. On Monday morning, students trickled into Hanson Hall for the first immersive workshop on unconscious bias. Outside, a line of faculty and administrators, once strangers in this conversation, welcomed each participant by name, badges in hand, as if they were arriving at a diplomatic summit rather than a required training. Inside, the room was arranged in a tight circle of chairs, the overhead lights softened to encourage openness. Dr. Walker and Marcus sat side by side at the front, their presence a quiet reminder of how far the campus had come since that fateful slur echoing off the lecture hall walls. The workshop began with a simple exercise. Everyone paired off and shared a moment when they had felt unseen or underestimated. A senior economics major described being talked over in study groups. A visiting professor spoke of subtle dismissals at faculty meetings. A custodial staff member recounted overhearing students mocking her accent. At first, the confessions were halting, voices trembling with vulnerability. But as the circle wound around again and again, a remarkable alchemy occurred. Empathy blossomed. Eyes moistened, heads nodded, and strangers embraced. Marcus watched as the student who had hurled that hateful slur the day of the lecture listened with tears running down his cheeks, his earlier defensiveness now replaced by profound regret and newfound understanding. Later that afternoon, a panel convened in the law school's moot court chamber, where the walls themselves seemed to resonate with the weight of justice. Panelists included Dr. Walker, the provost, an alumna who had led civil rights litigation in Washington, D.C., and a student from the Native American Student Alliance. Together, they discussed the intersection of free speech and hate speech, recounting case studies from other campuses and legal precedents. The discussion, moderated by the Student Affairs Director, was impassioned yet respectful, no longer a shouting match, but an examination of the fine line between protecting expression and safeguarding dignity. When a question arose about whether certain words should be banned outright, Dr. Walker countered that education rather than prohibition must be the guiding principle. When we outlaw speech, we risk driving prejudice underground. Our job is to shine a light so bright that hate cannot hide. By midweek, the university's storytelling series had been repurposed into Voices of Mid-Vale, a nightly open mic in the Student Centre. Here, students recited poems, sang songs, and shared art that grappled with identity and injustice. The line to sign up snaked around the corner, and for the first time in campus memory, students of every creed and background clamoured for airtime. One performance, a spoken word piece by a transfer student from Detroit, brought the room to its knees as she described watching her cousin disappear into the prison system. Afterwards, a freshman engineering student approached her trembling and offered his hand. "Thank you for teaching me what my textbooks never did." On Thursday, the administration inaugurated the Words and Actions Council, composed equally of students, faculty, and staff. They convened a marathon strategy session in the Alumni Lounge, where trustees spilled coffee and forgot their titles as they debated bylaws for promptly addressing harassment reports. Marcus sat at the table's head, chairing with a poised authority he had never imagined he would wield, guiding the group through consensus on a swift response protocol and a transparent appeals process. When the council adjourned, they had drafted a 3-tiered intervention model: education, mediation, and, if necessary, discipline, ready for implementation in the fall semester. By Friday evening, an expectant hush fell over the quad as students, faculty, and local community members gathered beneath the still glowing bistro lights for the week's culminating event: the unveiling of a public art installation commissioned to commemorate both the harm of hateful words and the healing power of collective action. The sculpture, a steel spiral of interlocking hands rising toward the sky, was draped in a silken cloth. As Dr. Walker stepped forward with Marcus and the dean, she recounted how a single word had sparked institutional transformation, and how each person in that crowd had chosen to learn rather than look away. With a shared tug, they pulled the cloth free, revealing the sculpture's gleaming surface and casting dancing shadows across the assembled faces. A roar of applause erupted, not for a speaker, but for the shared journey of a community that had refused complacency. Students filed forward to touch the cool metal, tracing the handprints of their peers. Faculty placed single white roses at the base. Even the custodial staff clustered to greet one another with heartfelt smiles. In that moment, the memory of the slur that had once silenced a lecture hall felt distant, overtaken by the resounding affirmation that respectful discourse could flourish, even amid deep differences. And as the night sky settled over Mid-Vale University, the words carved into a bronze plaque at the sculpture's foot shone softly in the lamplight. Here we confronted ape with human connection and found a stronger truth that binds us all. The following semester dawned with a palpable sense of purpose at Mid-Vale University. Freshmen arrived clutching pamphlets for courage and conversation. Upperclassmen wore pins proclaiming words matter, and even the campus bookstore had rearranged its display to feature titles on allyship and anti-racism. Dr. Walker's office door was rarely closed as students, faculty, and staff streamed in to propose new ideas. Everything from a peer-mediated conflict resolution program to a visiting scholars series on histories of oppression. One morning, she found herself at a round table in the newly christened Inclusion Hub, a repurposed conference room lined with bookshelves, whiteboards full of bullet points, and windows overlooking the Memorial Garden. There, representatives of the Words and Actions Council, students of every major, deans from arts and sciences and engineering, custodial and dining staff, were reviewing the first reports from their new rapid response team. Just the weeks earlier, Fraternity House had been accused of circulating a racist meme in a group chat. Under the old system, the incident would have been hushed or delayed for months. Now, the team had summoned the chapter president to a restorative justice circle within 48 hours, brought in cultural competency facilitators, and issued an educational sanction requiring the entire house to partner with local high schools on an anti-bullying curriculum. The council members passed around copies of the incident log, clear, transparent, and accompanied by student reflections on what they had learned. Later that afternoon, Dr. Walker slipped into a freshman seminar on campus activism, where a young woman named Priya, presented a proposal for an annual equity summit that would invite community leaders, city council members, and high schoolers to dialogue about systemic racism in both the university and the wider region. The students peppered her with questions about funding, marketing, and measurable outcomes. By the end, their advisors were nodding in approval, promising to allocate seed money from the university's provost office. Next, Dr. Walker joined Marcus and two other council co-chairs in a live-streamed town hall meeting broadcast to alumni and parents around the globe, where they outlined the semester's achievements. Over 2,000 participants in bias response workshops, the establishment of a permanent anti-harassment fund, and the planting of 50 more trees in the memorial garden, each tagged with the name of a student, faculty, or staff member who have volunteered in the program. A parent from California phoned in to thank them for raising my child in a place that takes racism seriously, while an alumna sent a donation earmarked for scholarships to support students who lead future inclusion initiatives. That evening, as twilight settled over the quad, Dr. Walker and Marcus walked among the seedlings now half as tall as in autumn, their leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. They paused before the steel sculpture and watched a small group of first years reading the bronze plaque aloud, their voices steady with conviction. A soft glow from nearby lanterns cast dancing reflections on the curved metal, and for a moment the campus felt smaller. It was no longer a place of lectures and exams alone, but a living testament to what happens when a single act of hate is met not with silence but with sustained, inclusive action. As Dr. Walker gazed at the students, she recalled how, just months before, the auditorium had erupted in shock at a hateful slur. Now those same students were teaching one another empathy and accountability. She placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, and together they stepped into the fading light of the memorial garden, two architects of transformation in a community that had refused to let a single word define its destiny. By commencement week, the transformation at Midvale University was unmistakable. White daisies and purple irises bloomed around the memorial garden, their petals nodding in the spring breeze as if in quiet applause. Dr. Walker stood beneath the wrought iron pergola that arched over the stone bench where Marcus Fletcher had first spoken his apology. Today, graduates in caps and gowns streamed through, gathering here to pause and reflect before the ceremony. A brass plaque, newly installed, shone at eye level, in honor of those who found courage in conversation and the community that chose to listen. Dr. Walker watched as families snapped photos, smiling in the soft light, their expressions a testament to how far the campus had come. A small brass box affixed beneath the plaque caught her eye. An unlocked time capsule filled last spring with students' reflections on justice. Today it will be opened, its contents read aloud for the first time. Marcus stepped forward, inauguration address in hand, and invited a pair of seniors to break the seal. The capsule's creak echoed in the hush, and inside lay handwritten notes, Polaroids of the first seedling plantings, and a list of pledges. I will speak up. I will listen. I will stand with my neighbor. Marcus lifted the folded papers and began to read. His voice, once trembling with shame, now carried clear pride as he recounted how those early commitments had blossomed into fully funded scholarships for underrepresented students, a permanent words and actions chair endowed by alumni, and our partnerships with local schools to replicate Midvale's model of restorative dialogue. As graduates filed past, adding their own brief notes to a new capsule, Dr. Walker's phone buzzed with a text, an invitation to deliver the keynote at the National Conference on Campus Inclusion next month, an honor she had declined once before to stay focused on Midvale. She looked up to see the provost approaching with a bound volume, a compendium of research papers, student essays, and policy proposals born from Midvale's initiatives, titled From Silence to Speech, a model for campus transformation. It bore both their names on the cover. The provost squeezed her arm. You changed the university, she said softly. Now it's time for the world to learn. On the graduation dais, as the university president called Dr. Walker forward to present the first Courage in Scholarship award to Marcus for his leadership, the crowd rose in a standing ovation that swept across the quad like a wave. In those moments, the initial slur that had once shattered their space felt like a distant echo, an ugly memory transformed into the catalyst for an enduring legacy of empathy, accountability, and shared humanity. Later, as the sun dipped below the treetops and graduates tossed their caps into the twilight sky, Dr. Walker lingered by the sculpted hands of the memorial spiral. She placed a single white lily at its base and traced its cool metal with her palm. The university, once stunned into silence, had found its voice, and as the last of the tassels floated down, she realized that the true measure of their journey was not merely in policy or ceremony, but in every conversation sparked, every perspective broadened, and every heart opened in the name of justice.